Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk, the podcast where pet parents, pet guardians, and pet professionals come together to dive into real issues in dog parenting. From controversial training methods to sensitive health topics, we're getting raw and real about what it means to care for our canine companions. Join us every Wednesday for unfiltered conversations, expert insights, and personal stories that will make you laugh, cry, and grow as a pet parent. No topic is off limits and no question goes unanswered. You won't get one perspective here. You'll get them all because every dog is different and every human is too. You can follow along on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Straight Up Dog Talk or by visiting www.straightupdogtalk.com. Tune in from any of your favorite podcast platforms. Welcome to Straight Up Dog Talk. I'm Em, and I'm back again this week with another amazing guest. This week we have Daniel Shuloff, who is not only an author, but he is into the whole nutrition of dog world with a brand of food called Keto Natural Diet. How are you doing today, Daniel?
I'm doing the same as usual, busy and managing it happily enough. Life is all right. We're recording in early January, so got some New Year's energy, but by the time this goes to air, I think that'll sound like old news.
Maybe not. I feel like that first quarter of the year, everybody's still kind of pumped up, right? And we're slowly getting into the spring and summer months. And I feel like that brings a whole different kind of revival to that energy. So I think we'll still be pumped up.
Good. Yeah, I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it's certainly a beautiful time of year here. Wildflowers start coming out and it starts to warm up. We're coming out of the winter. And so I feel you.
Well, I wish it was warming up here. In January, it is cold in Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, it's cold.
Oh my goodness. I always look forward to the spring. All right, Daniel. We got a lot of ground to cover today. So where would you like to start? Would you like to start with the book? Would you like to start with the diet? Would you like to start with the science diet litigation that's going on here? Where would you like to start?
Okay. I think that the way that if I was listening to this show, some idiot just appeared on your show and was going to talk to me for an hour or however long, I think I'd want to sort of take it somewhat chronologically. As somebody who likes to fancy himself as knowing a thing or two about companion animal nutrition, I came to this place through a pretty weird, convoluted path. So if you were to flash back to 2011, I was an attorney. I was still working as an attorney back then. I went to law school and practiced law for 5 years at this big corporate law firm in the city of Atlanta. I was raised with dogs. My mother would casually breed our dogs, have a litter of puppies once in a while. She was a huge dog lover. There were always dogs in the household. But as a young yuppie, basically, in 2011, I had never had my own. I got my own in 2011. 2011 was like kind of when this transition in my life from lawyer to like dog person started happening. And it happened because of the dog that I got, right? So many people, I'm sure, that are listening to the show, that's the formative experience for a lot, or motivating experience. You get this thing, come to love this thing so much, grow so interested in how to be a good owner and how to make good decisions for him. And the course of doing that kind of led me to get very interested in the subject of obesity in dogs and cats. And in essence, I was working an obscene amount. I had this dog, and he was a Rottweiler, where he's like big, intense dog with protective instincts and a lot of drive. And he needed daily exercise to be a polite member of society. And I was a busy dude. So the intersection of those two realities was I spent time trying to understand how to exercise him as efficiently, as effectively as possible, as dumb as that kind of sounds. And through doing that, I learned about the extent of the problem of obesity among dogs and cats in the Western world. And it fascinated me. It made no sense to me. So the facts that I always tell folks when I relay this story that popped for me are, number one, being moderately obese. There's degrees of overweight and obesity, but being the kind of dog that many dog owners wouldn't even recognize as overweight, the average type of dog that you see, moderately overweight, not like mega obese, is worse for that animal than a lifetime of smoking is for a person. On a percentage basis, that's how much that is expected to shorten that animal's lifespan compared to a lean. It's a huge deal. I don't have kids. I certainly didn't have kids in 2011. My dog was my vehicle for channeling any parental love that I had. The idea that you would casually allow your kid to become a smoker for his whole life, that would be a huge deal. That's generally regarded in society as that's really bad for you. Try to stop, even if though it's hard, it's an addictive product. We know being fat is bad for people. And so it's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. There are more overweight or obese dogs in the United States than what the general veterinary community recognizes as correct weight or lean dogs. More than 50% of the 70 plus million dogs in the United States overweight or obese. So you walk down the street, next dog that you see, that dog's going to be fat. Majority of dogs you meet are lifelong smokers. That just made no sense. Particularly to me, it's like, well, wait a second. Keeping yourself from not gaining too much weight, becoming fat is hard. But it's hard because we have to exert willpower, go out, go exercise, say no to these tempting foods that big food companies are trying to shove down our throat. Dog doesn't have to do any of that. I, as the owner, get to figure out exactly how much to feed that dog, what to feed that dog. It's a problem. Exercise, you could sort of squint and see like, oh, maybe this is a problem of lack of exercise. But the thing is that cats, who are not notoriously easy to direct in an exercise activity like a dog might be, are just as fat in the United States as dogs are. So it kind of blew me away. And you go talk to a veterinarian or you go plumb the internet resources, veterinary professional resources that exist at that point, and you get folks trying to explain the canine obesity epidemic in the United States, and you have them saying the whole party line is very pet owner focused. The issues are we have owners that are loving their pets to death. They're just too weak-willed to understand that their dog is begging, but it's bad, and you got to learn to say no. Or we're too lazy. If only we were exercising them more, that wouldn't be a problem. Or we're too stupid. We just have to educate pet owners so they can understand that being fat's actually bad. And none of that didn't smell right to me. That didn't describe me. I got to this place by reading a bunch of peer-reviewed studies and trying to follow the evidence so I could understand how to exercise my dog. That's what led me to all this stuff. It's not the case that I don't get that being fat is bad. Not lazy. I'm a exercise nut. I don't know. It just didn't feel like me. And so I went trying to understand the degree to which there was evidence supporting those kind of theories, those pet owner focused theories. And the reality is that the short answer there is they sound to various degrees plausible or implausible, but they're just guesses. There's no real science there. And I just had to understand, wait, what's the real answer here? And over the next 4 years, I went from a place of being a lawyer at this big corporate law firm to being full-time working on this book. I'm going to write something about this because there's got to be other people that are going through this kind of thing too. And maybe I can make an ebook about this and somebody would want to read it. And then it was like, this is a bigger story than that. I was traveling a lot. I went to Yellowstone, lived with the biologists at the Yellowstone Wolf Project, and went to all these dog food factories, went to these veterinary schools, all that kind of stuff. And at somewhere along the line, it was like, I'm going to make this my full-time thing. And I quit my job as being a lawyer. And I just worked on the book and doing all this weird research that I had to do. It's a science book. And a lot of it is this study says this study says that, but other parts involve travel. That's what I spent 4 years of my life doing and finished it and published it in 2016. It's called Dogs, Dog Food, and Dogma. And it's my attempt to try to understand how on earth are so many dogs and cats too fat. And it explains that. It comes to what I think are answers that I feel really strongly about to this day. And they're not conventional wisdom. And so they're important things I think, for people to understand.
I think that nutrition for animals is just such a hard topic anyway, right?
Absolutely.
Because not only did dogs used to be wild animals that we domesticated, so we don't really have a full picture of what their diet looked like when they were out in the wild. We can make guesses, right? But we'll never know 100% for sure. And then we have all these free roaming dogs in other countries that give us a basis of diet that we can also look at. But then they also come into town and scavenge and get into dumpsters and things like that too. So there really is a whole lot of information just in that. But then we have all of these companies making dog foods. And when you start looking at the ingredients in the dog food, there's some consistencies, especially in the bigger brand foods that are in the box stores. And then you start getting into the smaller brand. There's Sundays, there's Ziwi Peaks, there's Ollie, there's Keto Natural Pet Food. There's a whole range of different ones. And there are some consistencies and some inconsistencies. And then freeze-dried or dehydrated? Which one is better? And do we want raw or do we want pre-cooked that we stick in our freezer? All of this back and forth. And it really is very hard to get on Google and try to figure this stuff out.
It's not possible. I get asked this question a fair amount because my book has kind of two main theses. There's a scientific thesis, which is that the real root of the obesity problem is dietary carbohydrate. That if you took dietary carbohydrate out of the modern pet food ecosystem, you would solve the obesity problem overnight. So you can't make a dog obese without carbohydrate, literally. And then the other is a cultural kind of thesis. Well, okay, if the science says that, then why doesn't my vet tell me that? Why is it that so many people who are supposed to be the ones that we're relying on for understanding science and interpreting it for us aren't going to tell me that? And that is expanded as a big part of the book too. And the answer there, the thesis I put forth there is they've become to a too significant degree subject to the influence of companies that make money off of propping up the reputation of the dietary carbohydrate. And that side of the story I tell in my book and the issue more broadly, they published the book 9 years ago almost. To this day, a huge chunk of my work life is spent working on trying to solve that problem. And all that stems from industry plays a huge influence in shaping what the veterinary medical community understands about key nutritional topics. And it's a huge problem because some of the information that's in that ecosystem is just wrong. And so when you get to a place where veterinary professionals defend it because it's what they've been taught, it takes so much credibility out of them. And it makes folks that are listening like, can I really trust this person? They're telling me that because a dog evolved from a wolf at some point, that is why we should think it's a healthy thing to feed it carbohydrate. That's just really, really basic logic that's wrong. And so what it leaves you with is this world where the consumer does not know who to trust. And they have every right to feel completely confused and lost in the world of trying to just make a healthy decision for their dog. Go on the internet. You are screwed. You can't do it without swearing, basically. It's a total disaster where it's just, you're going to get not just differing information, but straight up absolute contradiction from two different folks that you should look to as a source of authority on these subjects. If you go to your local pet store, the mom and pop store that they really care about this subject, been in business 20 years, only carry the good foods, you're going to get 30 seconds of what makes a dog healthy nutrition. And then you go to your vet and say, give me 30 seconds. It's not just going to differ a little. It's going to be completely opposite. One is going to say everything your vet says is wrong. One is going to say everything those pet food store owners are wrong. That's a nightmare. That doesn't happen in physics. You know what I mean? You don't have these two major communities just being like, nope, they are completely wrong. It's a nightmare. Fixing it is the challenge.
I started this whole podcast. I'll tell you the two reasons: behavior and training. And the second one, nutrition for my dogs, because I have an all white terrier chihuahua mix and allergies, right? Because he's a white dog, but he also has pancreatitis. So we constantly were fighting this battle of what do I feed him? What do I feed him? What do I feed him? And he was on this Hill's Science diet, sensitive dogs and white coat diet combination of the two foods. And it held up for years, but we have since switched brands of foods because I have done so much research over the last 2 years, because I got my second dog, Fitz, who was my behavior challenge, but also a picky eater. And he would refuse to eat Blue Buffalo, Science Diet, all the things that as a vet tech I had been taught were the top-notch thing. But then I started having all of these conversations around nutrition, and I'm learning about what bioavailability is. I'm learning about how seed oils are bad for dogs. I'm learning about all the starch and all the fillers and all of these things in foods that don't make any sense to me, trying to figure out, okay, now where do I go from here? And that's when I run into books like yours and Canine Coca Mega Effect, which is another one that I read by Jaron Lucas. He makes Yum Woof. And yeah. And so it's another kind of keto, all meat-based food for dogs, and really learned a lot from him as well. And it's just kind of been this constant learning wheel for me. And the conclusion that I have come to is that we have specialists in veterinary medicine for behavior. We have it for ophthalmology, which is eyes, and we have TMJ. There's orthopedics. There are all kinds of different specialists. Why don't we have dietary nutritionists for veterinary
I can tell you,
as well?
That's a subject I can tell you all about. I know the history of that, and I can give you the answer because it's in my book, and I can distill it.
Please do.
Yeah. So right now, there are about 100,000 veterinarians in the United States, roughly. There are fewer than 100 board certified veterinary nutritionists. So there is a board certification. The problem that there's such a small fraction, and we're talking a tiny fraction, was 1 out of 1,000 vets have that. I went through the exercise in my book. At the time I was working on, where I live now, in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was like, I'm going to find the closest board certified veterinary nutritionist that I can. And none in my state, none in like 3 or 4 out of the neighboring states. I would have to get on an airplane to find one of these people. 1 out of every 1,000, fewer than 100 total, less than 2 per state on an average basis. Moreover, at the time, it was north of 60% of them were full-time industry employees. So not practicing vets, veterinary nutritionists working for Hills, Purina, etc. So 6 out of 10 of those 1 out of 1,000 are not people that you can go to. They're not out there marketing, I will help you make good decisions for your dog. You're talking about a few dozen people in the United States. Why is that? The answer is that unlike in human-focused scientific research and human medical care, the world of dogs and cats, particularly in the worlds of dogs and cats nutrition, industry money is the only money. If you go to vet school because you're like, I love animals, and you get into nutrition because you're like, I love nutrition, I want nothing more than to be a professor at a university that does nutritional studies on dogs and cats for my entire career. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help people understand that stuff better. I'm going to teach it. You cannot exist in that profession unless you take industry money, period. Full stop. We have things like the National Institutes of Health for human medical science and huge billion-dollar budgets, huge foundations that provide tons of money to ensure that things that are useful for mankind, but not necessarily profitable for any company or another, we're still going to work on that scientifically. That does not exist in doggy kitty world. It is industry money or you are going to fail in your career. What does that leave you with? It leaves you with the few dozen possible sources of advice on this topic. 90+% of them are in some degree or another reliant in their career on industry money. We live in a late enough stage of capitalism in the United States where industry plays a role in tons of things where in an ideal society it wouldn't. Politics and science and all kinds of other things. I struggle to come up with, and I know I'm like in the weeds on the doggy kitty side of it, there just aren't other domains where industry exerts such a comprehensive control. If you turn over the leading veterinary nutrition textbook in the United States, there is a Hills logo on the back of it. Now, if you were to think about that for a second, if you were a pulmonologist or your oncologist, if their leading textbook had a Philip Morris logo on the back of it, we would think of that as a problem. If the nutrition textbook for people had McDonald's logo on the back of it, that would be a problem. We would all recognize that as problematic. It is the norm in the veterinary world. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge pickle. It's not close to being solved. There are things that I'm trying to do and plenty of other well-intentioned people are trying to do to chip away at it, but it is a big, well-entrenched problem that is going to take time to fix.
I completely agree. All of my research has basically led me to that point where I'm just like, okay, so we stay away from anything that's in a big box store and we look at the ingredient labels. For me, the biggest light bulb moment was when I found out that all of the labels on dog food, dog treats, dog supplements, all of these things are not regulated. They're not FDA checked. They're not FDA approved. And you can literally have the craziest things, cork shavings, wood shavings, random fillers in your dog's food. And I understand that sometimes people are on a budget. I understand. And I never want anybody to feel guilt or shame for not being able to afford the best kibble that's out there because it is inaccessible. And there are a lot of people who just can't afford more than whatever it is that they're currently paying for. And I understand that because I was there before. I was at that point in my life at one time. And I think that as long as you can at least pay attention, I need to exercise my dog properly and I need to be aware if there starts to develop health problems, then you're doing the best that you can be doing. But I also think that if we held a higher standard to this part of the industry and really did our research, it would topple a lot of companies.
Oh, it's essential. The dietary carbohydrate is as central to the modern pet food ecosystem as tobacco is to the cigarette industry. It is the backbone of the industry, is selling product with as much carbohydrate as you can get away with. It's a very simple economic reality behind that.
So could you explain what a dietary carbohydrate is for the listeners?
Yeah, carbs. All right. So there are 3 different kinds of nutrients that contain calories. It's protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Everything else, they're little nutrients that are part of nutritional science. They're called micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. But like only 3 big groups that contain calories. A lot of nutritional science has to do with what amount of those respective nutrients you take in. Should you take in more of one or less of another? Should I get more protein in my diet or not? Do all these things impact muscular development, body fat development, metabolism in the same way, or do they impact the body in different kinds of ways? And so dietary carbohydrate is just carbs. Like this, I would say, in a poorly regulated industry, the one worst regulation is that at present, as of literally today, I suppose even by the time this episode goes to air, this will still be true. You do not have to tell the consumer how much carbohydrate is in your dog food. Your listeners won't be able to see our video recording of this, but I have my trusty Coke Zero Sugar bottle right here. And on the back of it is the FDA's nutrition facts panel. And we're all pretty familiar with that at this point. It's been more or less the same for decades. And it's got the helpful nutritional information that I use to think about, is this a good thing for me to eat or drink or a bad thing, right? It's required on all packaged foods. And of course, big part of it is devoted to how much carbohydrate is in there. There's grams of carbohydrate, percentage of daily value, total subsets. There are different kinds of carbs. Sugar's one of them, but there are lots of other kinds too. It's got a disclosure of total sugar, added sugar, all that kind of stuff. None of that under the modern pet food labeling regulation scheme is required in dog food. And so you can calculate it on your own, but you better bring a calculator. It's not very straightforward. Of course, carbs are bad. My dog evolved from being a wolf. They ate zero carbs. Of course, I'll try to minimize it. I'll find the product that's got the least carbs. Good luck. Good luck with that. Super poor regulation. It's important to note, however, that it is changing. Is that something that you know about already?
No, actually, it's not. Yes. I would love to know more, though.
I'd be happy to tell you, but if it's not boring enough for your listeners to talk about nutritional science and dog food, then surely the regulation of nutritional science and dog food, I'm not sure anybody will be awake. But basically, here's what it boils down to. The organization that sets the rules that matter with regard to how dog food is labeled in the U.S., it's called AAFCO, the Association of American Feed Control Officials. AAFCO is a private organization. It's not a part of any government. It's just a group of folks. What they do is every year they put out new rules. And each state adopts those rules as a matter of course. There are reasons why, but it's beyond the scope of this. And so AAFCO puts out its 2020 model rules, the organization that says, yeah, you don't have to tell people how much carbohydrate is in your pet food. Just recently, at the end of 2023, AAFCO adopted new rules regarding quantitative nutritional disclosures. So the numbers regarding what nutrients are in pet food products. And thankfully, after decades of pressure, they're finally going to make meaningful changes. And so now when you turn over the back of a bag of dog food, you're going to see the pet nutrition facts panel. And it's going to look a lot like the FDA's main nutrition facts panel. It's got carbohydrate disclosure, protein disclosed in a format that actually makes sense, all the stuff that you use to make good decisions for yourself regarding what you eat. And the only reason that I can say that it's not the rule today is there's an enforcement discretion period that's going on now. Essentially, like as one last FU to anyone that cares about trying to improve the consumer rights in this domain, that AAFCO basically was like, this is the new rule, but we won't start enforcing it for 3 to 5 years. We're going to give everybody a chance to change their label, which as somebody who owns a dog food company, let me tell you, does not take 5 years. But the new rules have been adopted. It's happening. It's just a question of when. I think we will be the first pet food company in the country to comply. We're not there yet, but this is a new rule and it's happening. I think the vast majority of them will drag their feet as much as possible because people aren't going to like what they see, is the bottom line. As I'm sure you know at this point, the vast majority of kibbles in this country, and all of them that are priced anything under $50 for a large bag, are 50% carbohydrate or more. There's more carbs than any other kind of nutrient in most pet food. There's more carbohydrate than anything else. Add the rest of everything together, and it's not as much as it is corn, wheat, potato, whatever your carbohydrate of choice is. So it's going to open some people's eyes.
Well, and that's another thing, how when you look at labels, the first three things that you should see on your dog food is meat, an organ, and then bone. And if you look at 90% of what's out there as far as dog food goes, you're not going to see that in the first three ingredients. You're going to see chicken, maybe some chicken meal, and then it's going to be peas or something like that. It's never actually what it's supposed to be. And when I learned that, that was another thing that I went, okay, well, this is an issue here. I think the really big one for me was greenies and learning about how much starch and sugar is in greenies and how it's actually making their tartar worse and not actually helping the tartar. As somebody who's a vet tech, these are what we recommend, and these are the brands of food that we recommend. And then going back and being like, oh my gosh, all those dogs that we did dentals on, we were part of the problem.
Yeah, you've at least had the realization, and I'm sure plenty of other veterinary professionals have had that realization. And it's great that you have it. And of course, it makes you feel a sense of like, what have we done? Like you said, part of the problem. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that dental one is like not close to the worst one. Dog needs cleanings more often. Oh, that's good for the veterinarian. It's not great for the dog that has to go through this procedure, but it doesn't shorten its lifespan. Let me give you one prominent example of something that is arguably worse. I'm sure many of your listeners know what the disease diabetes is. Very common, unfortunately, problem, huge problem in people, just like it is in dogs and cats. And it's become a huge problem in dogs, particularly pretty recently. Nowadays, lots of folks I know, because there are a lot of our customers, have dogs with diabetes. So what is diabetes? For anyone that doesn't know, it's basically being allergic to carbohydrate. Your body needs to do specific things to put away carbohydrate. Carbohydrate goes into your blood, and this all applies for your dog too. And none of this is controversial, for the record. This is mainstream. Your vet will tell you this too. When you eat a carb, it goes into your blood as something called glucose. All carbs are made of this molecule called glucose, and it's sugar. Glucose equals sugar. That's what it is. Maybe you've heard of like complex carbs or simple carbs. Complex carbs have dozens of glucose molecules configured in some weird way. So they're complex because there's that weird configuration, and when you eat them, they have to get broken down into those individual molecules of glucose, which is complex, to take them from big complicated thing down to individual molecules. Simple carbohydrate, much more straightforward. Just one or two glucose molecules together, and you eat it, that gets digested down to the same constituent parts. And it goes into your blood or goes into your dog's blood as those constituent parts. It goes in as glucose, which is why so many people with diabetes are so conversant with the term glucose and blood glucose. And they understand that stuff really well, because being diabetic essentially means if your blood glucose gets too high, it becomes really bad for you, because your body has mechanisms that it uses to bring blood sugar levels back down. There's a hormone, it's called insulin. Your pancreas produce it. And when it goes into the blood, the glucose gets shuttled into other tissues. It goes into the fat, goes into the muscle. And there it's perfectly stable. But if too much of it is in the blood, if there was no insulin, that's really bad, and it can kill you. It can put you in a coma and you can die. People that have diabetes, their bodies don't make insulin at a good enough rate. That's what functionally is happening, is they eat some kind of carbohydrate, glucose goes into the blood, they don't make enough insulin, and so the blood glucose levels stay high. It functions exactly the same way in dogs as in people. If you go to your veterinarian today, they say to you, I'm sorry, your dog has diabetes. That's not a great thing. This is a bad disease. It's difficult on the owner. You have to manage it with injections, typically. You have an animal that's going to be subjected to restrictions. It's going to probably be linked with other diseases. There are other things that get downstream, end up being problems as well. Not a good diagnosis. Fortunately, nutrition is the primary way to manage it. And what we're going to do is we're going to put you on a prescription-only formula for diabetes. That formula, the most popular diabetes treatment in the United States, is called Hill's Metabolic, made by Hill's Pet Nutrition. It's about 40% digestible carbohydrate. That is like you went into the doctor and you said, I have an allergy to peanuts. And they said, great, we're going to give you a prescription-only diet of peanuts. It's literally like that. Like diabetes is you cannot process carbohydrate. Okay, here it is, a 40% carbohydrate product. And I use that as an example to hold up next to the dental one because it's wrong, just like the idea that greenies is actually good for a dog's teeth is wrong. But it's also a violation of reasonable expectations that everyone should have of a medical professional. It's so obviously wrong that The idea that a vet could recommend that in this day and age should be malpractice. It's so obvious. It's anyone outside of a industry where that's completely co-opted by outside forces and being fed misinformation gets it. But your vet is going to tell you 40% carbohydrate product.
Wow. No wonder those insulin doses are so high, because they have to combat with it. When I was a vet tech, a lot of cats.
They
A
run
lot
together.
of cats are
A lot of cats,
diabetic.
more than dogs.
So many cats are diabetic. And it's just wild to me to know that now, because I didn't know that the food was so much of a problem. Like you said, I'm allergic to cinnamon. That would be like somebody saying, okay, you have to have a cinnamon roll every single morning.
Special diet. Your allergy to cinnamon is going to have only 40% cinnamon. It's like, what? No, 0%. Zero. Another interesting thing about carbs in dogs is that because dogs evolved the ability to digest carbs really recently, evolutionarily speaking, quick detour, talk about evolution for 2 seconds. And I know we're not trying to do graduate level discussions about scientific topics here, but very high level. Dogs evolved from wolves. For 99.9% of their evolutionary heritage, over hundreds of millions of generations, they were the same species. They followed the same part of the lineage. Over the past 10,000 years, which is like, if you think about a clock telling 24 hours worth of time, you're talking about like the last 2 minutes or something like that, or last seconds even. It's like a tiny, tiny fraction of the total history of the species. It broke apart because people came around and they started doing things that changed some of them. Generally speaking, scientists these days, as I'm sure your listeners know, genetic science is like pretty wild these days. They've mapped that stuff pretty well. And they figured out the two things that make dogs and wolves genetically different. Primarily, two big things. Number one, the brain. Not the same. Meaningful differences there. Go take a wolf puppy, bring it home, and treat it like you brought home a dog puppy, and tell me how that works out for you. Because it will not work out. You just have a manageable house pet. I know that there are dog-wolf hybrids. I know I've had one in my home, literally been my dog for a period of time. It had wildness. It had docileness to some degree too. But what I'm trying to say is that human interference in trying to make some of these things docile so that we could hang out with them and they can do things for us manifests as differences in the brain. Wolf's got a wild animal brain. Dog is domestic animal brain. Second thing, though, digesting carbohydrate. Your body digests carbs using different things. You put food in your mouth, it starts digesting it right away. Other stuff takes place in the stomach, other stuff in the intestines. But in the mouth, there's real stuff going on. It's why greenies, for instance, is bad for teeth, because it's getting broken down into individual glucose molecules in the mouth. If it only got broke down in the stomach, then it wouldn't be an issue. It'd pass through. By the time it passes the teeth, it's not getting digested yet. But your body and a dog's body makes an enzyme that's in your spit called amylase. Amylase is like if you put a piece of bread and hold it in your mouth for like 30 seconds, it's going to start to taste sweet. And what's going on there is the amylase in your saliva is breaking down the complex carbohydrate that is in the bread. Bread is complex carbs into individual glucose molecules. That's sugar. It's becoming sugar, and you taste that as sweet. It plays a big part in how you digest carbs. The second thing that makes dogs different from wolves don't make much amylase at all. Dogs evolved the ability to digest carbs. Wolves, on the other hand, I know this from having lived at the Yellowstone Wolf Project, 0.0% of their diet comes from carbohydrate. They can't digest it. Even if they were to eat some amount of carbs, you'll hear sometimes people wrongly say, well, a wolf might eat a elk that has a big chunk of grass in its stomach. Isn't it eating some carbs? To the extent that that happens, and it doesn't really happen, it's not digesting it at all. They don't pull calories out of it. They can't break the stuff down. Dog just evolved the ability to do that like 10,000 years ago, which is just a few tiny ticks of the clock. So honestly, I don't know how I got off on that digression about evolution. Maybe you remember, but it's an interesting one, I think. So hopefully your listeners got something out of that.
I think that's an important distinction, right? We need to understand that there is a difference between humans and animals and how we digest things and how their bodies are different from ours. One of the things that I've heard so many conversations about obesity in dogs and obesity in cats over the last couple of years. And for me, what I don't understand about people who are not on board with understanding obesity in animals is the posture of an animal, right? Their body posture is so much different than ours, right? So where they carry their weight is different. But can you imagine being a 9-month pregnant woman
Right.
Being forced to crawl around on your hands and knees all day long. That's an overweight dog or an overweight cat right
Right.
there.
Good
You're
point.
carrying all that weight in your stomach. You're stressing your back. You're stressing your
Good
spine,
point.
your pelvis. I don't think that people think enough about that. And I think that that kind of comes into play when we look at our pets and we give them things we shouldn't. I give my dogs things that I shouldn't give them. I know that I do it. I will flat out tell you, when I make mac and cheese, there's extra mac and cheese. I can't eat all of the mac and cheese. So I give it to my dogs. They get a little bit of it. Do I know that's bad? Yes, I know that that's bad. Does it happen every single day? No. Does it happen every single week? No. It probably happens like once a month. And I've made my concessions with that. But also, neither of my dogs are overweight. They're very fit. They get in their activities, they get in their enrichment, and they are not overweight. And I'm very careful about what they get as far as they don't get greenies, obviously. They're bully sticks and they're natural chews and things like that. So I think that it's really important that people understand that the chemicals in a dog's mouth are going to be different than they are in a human's mouth. And we're going to digest things and process things different because we're different species.
Yeah, exactly.
How can we make a food for a different species when clearly, back when all of this started, don't fully understand the other species, and we're just trying to make sure that they're full?
Yeah. All right. Look, we know that species tend to evolve into a place where their natural diet, whatever diet they're eating on a regular basis, day after day, is doing good things for them. It's keeping them alive long enough to be successful evolutionarily, right? For 99.99% of a dog's genetic evolution, it ate one thing and one thing only, and that is raw animal meat. That's it. For a period of time, there was a subsector of the human nutrition community that was very interested in what's called the paleo diet. And the idea there was a smart thing to do is to eat like your ancestors ate. And the reason that they think it's a smart thing is what I was just saying a minute ago. You had hundreds of millions of years eating this way. Evolution optimizes your diet. The only way you can have chronic disease problems is when your environment doesn't match up with the genes. But the thing with paleo diet and people is that there aren't too many people around these days living like cavemen. And a lot of the debate over the validity of that was this tribe that still exists in this tiny location in the Amazon lives this way. And some other specialists would say, well, yeah, but these guys on this island in the Pacific do it this way. Well, with dogs, you don't have to try to recreate the past or find some tiny pocket. We know from genetics that them and wolves were the same for 99.9%. And wolves are still around. They're out there today. And so I can go to the Yellowstone Wolf Project and ask them, what do they eat today? They eat today the same thing they've always eaten. 0 carbs, all meat, fat, protein. Meat things don't have carbs in them. Carbs come from plants. That's a hard and fast rule. So one good way to think about, even if you know nothing about nutrition and you don't even Google, what's nutritious for my dog? If you just go, I'm just going to assume Mother Nature is pretty good at this stuff, and I'm just going to give it what it did for the vast majority of its development, you're going to end up making a pretty good decision. That's a good rule to follow. If you can reliably say that for a huge chunk of your evolution, things were one way, that's a good indication that that way is good for you. That's a good sign. That has always struck me as an important reason why you should be skeptical of the idea that a diet composed of 40 to 50 to 60% carbohydrate, which is the norm in the pet food world these days, is a healthy thing. That should immediately strike anyone, even if you have just like a 101 level understanding of evolution and biology. That's got to stick out for you as like, wait, that can't be right. And it's impossibly sad that vets who are professional, we understand science people, can look at that reality and go, no, it's still the right answer. Still right. It's just shocking. It's just mind-blowing.
I do feel like there is a shift in at least some of the veterinary community. I know my veterinarian is really excellent about having these conversations with me. One of the brands of foods that we regularly feed is Sundays, and that was created by a veterinarian. And it's really important to see that there is change happening. Clearly, like you're doing it, right? You're putting in this research and you're making change and trying to help our dogs have better lives. I think that the thing that I think about the most is if we could change dogs' diets, what would that do to the longevity of their life? Would it change how long they live? Would it change?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Right. I think about this
I will
all the
tell
time.
you with ironclad confidence, my hand before God, that if you took carbohydrate out of the modern pet food ecosystem, you would improve lifespan. Here's the reality. You said before, sometimes you give your dogs mac and cheese.
Mm-hmm.
I give my dogs things that are not great for them if they were extended more broadly. My dogs are very lean. I have a St. Bernard, and he is a Terminator. He is a ripped St. Bernard. It's crazy to hear that. But all his ribs, all his muscular definition, like a fit pit bull is what his body looks like. The reality, though, is you can make a dog lean a lot of different ways. You can exercise the hell out of it. You can restrict the amount of food altogether that it's eating. You can do any combination of things if you want to make a dog lean. You can only make a dog fat in the first place if you feed it carbohydrate. That is a ironclad rule. If you take carbohydrate out of the pet food ecosystem, you don't have any more obese dogs. And obesity is worse for dogs than smoking. If you took smoking out of a population of people, you are going to improve their life. There's no room for debate around that one. It's clearly broken, but it's still the norm. It's there.
I think that if more people knew that, the modern day pet parent, everybody who's listening, everybody who could potentially be listening years from now, I think if more people knew that there was this issue with carbohydrates in dog food, that a lot more people who are so active about doing the best for their pet and
absolutely
people would rally and there
absolutely
would be more significant change, but the education piece is just not there, which is why this podcast exists, because I'm trying to help make those connections. If we want to make effective change, we do have to work together as a community, and we do have to really put that education piece out there that I think a lot of people are missing. And it's just so unfortunate that it feels shady. This is something that we've been sweeping under the rug because it's more convenient to sweep under the rug than it is to actually deal with it head on and try to help our dogs live better, longer, healthier lives. And that is something that is so important to me. I know it's something that is so important to the listeners,
absolutely,
which is a great segue into talking about your food and why you created it and how it is effective change for dogs. You sent us a bag of your food, and my dog, we use Open Farms and Sundays. One is on one and one is on the other, okay? And you sent your bag of food over, and instead of messing up everybody's diet, we just kind of sprinkle it in. But we also, because of the size of it, I love the size of it. It is amazing for training treats, for
good.
Going on walks, our training session, or when we're doing scatter feeds and we sprinkle the food on the floor and let them find it, sniff it out, and get that mental enrichment going on. Your food is the perfect size for it. And my picky eater, as soon as that bag opens, he's right there. He's like, oh, she's bringing out the good stuff.
Returning to where we were an hour ago when I was trying to tell people about how I got to be in this chair today. After I wrote this book, really proud of it. Felt as I feel today that I was absolutely right about the two main points. One of the points is carbohydrate is the devil, basically. That you can't make a dog fat without carbohydrate. It changes your dog's metabolism in crazy ways, and that it ought to be the number one issue for a conscientious pet owner trying to decide what's healthy for your pet. It ought to be, is it toxic? Will my dog eat it? Then protein to carbohydrate ratio. There's just nothing else that moves the needle as much. And I'm not going to try to persuade you about that today, because I'm sure you and your listeners all come to it from different places. But that's my money, my hand before God. That's the one thing you should be optimizing for. Most protein, least carbohydrate as possible. Raw diets, because they need to be kept from spoiling, need to either be frozen, refrigerated, dried out, subject to some sort of process that keeps spoilation. That tends to make them quite pricey. Generally speaking, a calorie of a premium bought over-the-counter raw diet is going to be 5 times the calorie of a Kibble. So if you have small dogs, might not be that big an issue for your budget, even if you don't have a big budget. Kibble, one of the reasons it became the backbone of the industry is it's incredibly inexpensive. And it does keep the dog alive. The dog pulls enough nutrition out of it to get through its day. Great. But if you have a small dog, it might be the difference. Switching it to raw might be the difference between 25 cents a day and $1.25 a day. And that's nothing for people. That's $1. But I have a St. Bernard. My St. Bernard eats an obscene amount of food. What does your Chihuahua mix weigh?
Toby weighs between 9 and 10 pounds
Okay.
usually. He gets a quarter of a cup of food.
Wayne weighs 170 pounds. Dripping wet. He's a rock. So that's 17-ish of your dog. Just him. And we got 3 dogs. I'm not a huge outlier. There are plenty of people that have these big dogs, large packs. And for them, a 5 times as much difference, like increase your dog food expenditure by 5x, doesn't go from 25 cents to $1.25. It goes from $15 a day maybe to $75 a day or more for a lot of people. So it's a non-starter for some people. That meant that you're going to just feed your dog a lot of carbs. The lowest carb Kibble products you could find were 30% carbohydrate, something like that. If we could make something that was legitimately low in carbohydrate content, like a good raw diet is, but in Kibble form, we'd have something. There would be people that would be looking for macronutritional profile, like a raw diet, but I can't afford a raw diet. And that's what we ended up making. Our flagship product line is called Ketona. It is less than 5% digestible carbohydrates, just about 50% protein. 90% of the protein comes from animal sources, comes from kinds of things that most of the protein that wolves eat comes from, not as opposed to other things. There's some plants that have some amount of protein in them. They look a little different nutritionally than meat-based protein. So it took us about a year to figure out how to do it. Making Kibble without carbohydrate is like trying to bake bread without flour. One of the 2 main reasons that carbohydrate is the backbone of the US pet food industry is, one, it's incredibly inexpensive. A calorie of carbohydrate is less than 1/10 the cost of a calorie of meat-based protein. It's just way, 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 way cheaper. You think of silos of the ingredients that are used. That's not a thing you can do with meat. But secondly, it plays a functional role in making kibble, just like it does in baking baked goods. If anyone's listening to this ever try to bake a cupcake or a loaf of bread or whatever without flour, it doesn't work. The dough falls apart. When you heat up stuff with flour, it all binds together. And the reason for that is carbohydrate molecules gelatinize and they hold everything together. That's what they do. And then you use dehydration to take the moisture out of it, and you're left with a crunchy biscuit, a meaty biscuit, basically. But you take the flour out, it doesn't work. Well, flour, that's carbohydrate. And so you want to make kibble without that, that's hard. No one's ever really done that. And it took us a year to figure out how to do it. And we did a bunch of things, but one of the things that you already alluded to is we made them really small. You need a lot of binding to hold together a big carbohydrate thing. Well, we'll make ours small. Some folks and some companies that will try to tell you big dog, big kibble, small dog, small kibble. And it seems a little juvenile to me, but I could tell you my 170-pound St. Bernard eats our kibbles, even though they're really small. If I could make them with 0% carbohydrate, I would. That is what I believe is optimal. If you want the gold standard, money is no object, convenience is no object, you shouldn't feed our product. You should feed a complete and balanced, all meat, raw diet to your dog, full stop. But if that is a concession, the difference between the gold standard and us is much smaller than the difference between the gold standard and a shitty raw diet. There are, alas, raw diets out there that are 40% carbohydrate too. The specter of raw has become so synonymous with healthy that there are folks taking advantage of that as a business practice, where they're like, we make a raw thing too. But the thing that's good about raw diets historically is more protein, less carbohydrate. Unscrupulous folks have propped up lots of products that are raw, but it's 40% carbohydrate. And so the difference between those two products, way bigger the difference between us and raw. Started selling it in 2017. We're recording in early 2025 now. We've got tens of thousands of customers. Personally, my order of priorities and what moves the needle the most nutritionally after, is this toxic? And is this going to give my dog a vitamin deficiency? If it's not complete and balanced, you can reliably say it's got the right amount of vitamin D, vitamin A, all that kind of stuff. That's more important than protein to carbohydrate ratio, because you don't want a deficiency disease. If you got those bases covered, your dog wants to eat it, it's not toxic, and it's not going to give it a vitamin deficiency, protein to carbohydrate ratio is the most important. At the risk of being on a soapbox a little bit here, if you go around your human nutrition food store, natural grocers, Whole Foods, you look at packaged foods and what kinds of concepts, language folks are using to sell healthier for you foods, you'll find that they don't look like the ones that have become the touchstones and the key language and the key concepts in modern pet food. It's not the case that raw versus not raw is a major distinction. Human nutritional scientists don't spend any time working on that as an issue. There are tens of thousands of people working on macronutrient stuff and how they do different things, but not that. What are the ingredients, frankly? To some degree, but so much of modern nutritional, human food nutrition is macros. How many grams of protein is in this thing? How many grams of sugar is in this thing? What percentage of it is that? And that's just not the case in the pet food world. People know that there are differences in healthy versus not healthy, but because they're deprived of the macro information in meaningful ways by the poor regulation, you end up having people trying to come up with good proxies for what they already know. Grain-free. Well, grain-free sounds like low carb. It sounds more like what a wolf would eat. But there are folks, once it becomes a touchstone, people can take advantage of it. You can make a grain-free dog food with 60% carbohydrate. You can make a raw diet with 60% carbohydrate. And so these things that are like good rules of thumb, if you don't have the macros, end up being the rules that we're talking about. And they're good. They're good approximations. They're good estimates. Raw makes tons of sense. Grain-free, in a vacuum, probably somewhat better than the same-ish macros with grain. But the reality is that once the quantitative, the actual numbers are on the label like they are in chips, 15 years, this conversation will look really different. You can take that to the bank. It's unquestionable in my mind that it's healthier than the vast majority of kibbles, particularly for dogs with certain diseases. Like I told you before, the prescription-only diet for dogs with diabetes, 40% carbohydrate. Huge chunk of our customer dog has diabetes. The vet told them to feed Hill's Metabolic. They're on tons of insulin every day. I learned about how diabetes works, and so I went looking for a low-carb dog food. I found yours. We switched our dog. If you have a dog with diabetes, you measure its blood sugar, just like a person. You are doing that measurement. You can see firsthand real data that will show you that our diet keeps your dog's blood sugar lower than Hill's Metabolic, or for that matter, way lower than other kibbles. So those people tend to be some of our best customers. It's just such a clear indication because they're measuring what's going on inside their dog's body.
What about copper storage disease?
Dude, that's an interesting one that frankly, I'm not sure where I fall on it at this point. I have some degree of worry that like so many issues, it's sort of something that's getting played up by folks who have a dollar to make through it. I am very involved in another issue that's sort of tied to some of the things we've been talking about, which is the scandal involving dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs. It's heart disease that dogs have gotten forever, but became big national news in 2018 because the FDA said it was going to start looking at whether grain-free dog foods were giving dogs this heart disease. Between that, carbohydrate-related stuff, figuring out a quasi-nutritional justification that points to, just feed Hills, just feed Royal Canin to your dog. And this sort of smells like that to me. But I'm not educated enough, frankly, to weigh definitively on, is this something that's major concern that's getting worse in the pet food ecosystem because something about how we're sourcing ingredients is screwing up copper levels? Should AFCO's copper maximum come down? I don't have a good informed opinion on that. It's clearly a real disease that some dogs get, whether it's meaningfully worse at specific, like I said, where the rubber hits the road is like AFCO's maximums for copper come down because the idea being too many dogs are winding up with too much copper in them. And so I'm not sure the dust has settled on that one yet. What about you?
So I have a couple of friends who have dogs that have copper storage disease, and they have had a really hard time finding foods that have a lower percentage of copper in them or little to no copper in them. So I think it's probably just another industry thing that probably should be regulated.
Yeah.
I mean, I think dog food in general should be regulated. But the reason that I asked is because I wanted to know what your percentage of copper in your food is so that if needed, I can say, maybe you should try out the keto because it might help you.
It's not. AFCO has rules that are like, you can't put this much more copper in your dog food because there's science that says that's bad. They're going to get one of these diseases or another. And I know we comply with those because I look at the nutritional profile of every dog food batch that we produce. But does it qualify as a low copper food? If that's what those people are looking for, is something that's very low in copper content, because it's an essential nutrient for dogs too. AFCO is a minimum for copper as well. So you got to have some of it in there. Whether ours would be a perfect fit for the person that's trying to minimize their dog's intake of copper, I don't think so. but I'm not
Okay.
100% on it.
Okay. Well, it's definitely something worth looking at. I think that anybody who's looking for options should know that there are lots of options out there. And as long as I can say safely that you have a brand of food that is not above the amount,
You can definitely say that.
then it's definitely something that I could
100%.
let people look at.
Your dog is not going to get some kind of copper problem because it eats our food. If that's part of the logic, you don't have to worry about this. It's something that people are worrying about, that kind of thing. If your dog has diabetes and you're currently feeding Hill's Metabolic, you need to switch, basically, is the bottom line. An all meat diet that you make yourself. And before we got on the phone, you're telling me about some of the social media stories you're putting together recently where you're going to a butcher and chopping up cow organs and dehydrating them. Go do that. Or choose our product if you don't want to do that. Buy a raw diet that's all meat, not one that's 40% carbs. Just switch. You have to. It will save you so much money on insulin, and it's so much better for your dog.
Let's talk about the grain thing for a second.
Oh, yes,
I would like
please.
to go a little bit more into that because this is a conversation that somehow I keep coming back to. Like you said, going back to nature, going back to the natural world. Dogs are not out there just digging around for rice, right?
You can't. It's like, here's the thing about, want to know something about grains? Whether you're a dog or a person, you can't digest them until they're cooked. Okay? Full stop. A dog is not taking a stalk of wheat. You have to cook it. Think about what that means in evolutionary terms. Cooking food is not something that has been around for a long time. It's like the idea that anyone that understands anything about science, let alone the people you're supposed to be trusting, can go, your dog needs to eat grains or its heart doesn't develop correctly, is just being a moron. That is so obviously wrong, but it's still a thing you will find people saying straight face. That's crazy.
It's wild to me just how much people don't think about the common sense things like that, especially in regards to dog food and how simple it could be. So if you could tell somebody, this is the most obvious raw diet that you could give your dog, it doesn't matter how much it costs. If you were going to do it yourself, if you were going to go to the butcher and you were going to buy the meat and the bone and the organ and the sardines, do you know what you would feed if you were going to feed an all raw?
Well, I'll tell you, the things I know are micronutrient deficiencies are real, that is an issue that you can't just sweep under the rug and be like, nah, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to give them a lot of protein, some fat, and the rest is fine. That's not a sufficient approach. I know also that organs, the secondary organs, skeletal muscle tend to be the places packed with those kinds of micronutrients. I would not feel confident enough going into the butcher and being like, give me this one and this one, because I feel good about that's going to do micronutrients. I'm not saying by any stretch that I'm well reasoned in that approach, but I would have to do homework.
What I learned about liver is that you have to be careful how much liver you feed because you can actually give your dog toxicity levels of vitamin A if you give them too much liver. So it's things like that. And again, all of this information is just all over the place on the internet. So it's so hard to decide, should we feed raw? Should we supplement it with some sort of kibble? And this, again, where all of the confusion comes in and why I keep bringing in people to talk about dog food, because it is so hard to figure it out. I don't feed my dogs raw because I have a dog that has pancreatitis, and I don't think it's fair to give one dog a raw diet and the other dog a not raw diet. In my head, that's not fair. Would they know the difference? Probably, because you can smell the difference, right? They know the difference. That's those natural instincts start kicking in there. So I have decided to accommodate by dehydrating tracheas, livers, kidneys, heart, things like that, supplement in and make it safer for the dog that does have pancreatitis, but benefit from those nutrients. And then balance it out with our other diets, which your food has become part of our diet because we use it as our training. That is a good motivator. You need a high value treat that's healthy for your dog. And this is why the whole process of dehydrating started, is because I started looking at the ingredients in my training treat, and I'm spending $20 for a bag of training treats that's full of carbohydrate and wheat and flour and all of this stuff that's not good for your dog. And I'm spending $20 every time I buy a bag of it. And instead, I go to the butcher and I spend $20 and I get 20 pounds of organ meats.
Yeah.
That's probably going to last me 6, 7, 8 months if I cut it all up into tiny little pieces after I dehydrate it.
Remember, and this is something, I know you've thought about this, but one thing that makes raw, not raw dehydrated, but raw different from kibble or dehydrated products is the moisture content. Meat has 70+% moisture typically. So your garden variety raw diet is going to be something like that, 70+% moisture. Whereas kibble and other things that have been dehydrated in some kind of capacity are less than 10% moisture. So that difference in weight, you'll see, you clearly got a good deal regardless, but don't forget that 70% of that 20 pounds is water and it's going to come out. So you're going to be left with 3 pounds. 3 pounds is still a shitload of meat to feed your dog.
But right now, it's 5-gallon bags full of frozen parts in my freezer.
Here's what I think in terms of what to figure out how to feed your dog. First of all, recognize the nutrition is not the only issue. We talked about some that are really important for people. Budget, real deal. However, don't forget that the junkiest human food you can possibly come up with is 4 or 5 times as much on a per calorie basis as dog food. One of the reasons that it became such an industry standard is it'll keep your dog alive. It'll satisfy short-term nutritional needs if it's formulated correctly. It's shelf stable and it's absurdly inexpensive. So people's sense of cheap versus expensive is informed by that being the norm. If you switch your dog from the healthiest kibble, my kibble, to McDonald's chicken nuggets, your dog food budget goes through the roof.
Also, why are people comfortable spending $18 at McDonald's on themselves, but not comfortable spending $18 on their dog to feed them something that's healthy and sustainable?
Yeah, sure. My emotional motivation, I love my dogs and I like dogs generally. I like meeting new dogs. Some are cuter than others to me. I like them all. They're interesting to me. But the reality of my professional life is mostly informed by the feel-good factor of helping people because I know people really do love their dog. And so I'm really you do you, it's your dog. I know you take your responsibilities towards that animal more seriously than I do. As long as you're making the best decision you can, that's what I strive for. I have plenty of places in my life where I feel like, what the heck is wrong with people? But it tends not to be that. Oh, if people could just do this better for their dogs, I sympathize. But it is what it is. Multiple issues. Economics is one of them. Sustainability is one of them. Sustainability is obviously an important thing. How to make that work with hundreds of millions of pets around is a challenge. And then manufacturing process. You want to feed it close to its natural environment as possible. If you give me exact same macros, raw and kibble, I'll choose the raw. If you give a dog the exact same protein, carbohydrate, fat content, kibble, raw, and you measure its blood sugar or insulin levels, they're going to be identical, virtually identical, if not identical. Whereas if you take a dog from a 40% carbohydrate raw diet to my kibble, his blood sugar looks completely different. Macros really move the needle. There's a reason why the vast majority of the thousands of human nutritional scientists in the world focus on that. Of course, dogs and people shouldn't eat the same foods. Of course not. But we can agree on the constituent building blocks, the concepts that we're playing with. It's weird that so much on the doggy side is about stuff that none of the much more sophisticated human nutritional community is looking at. That's weird to me. There's something up with that, and it's the labeling. So that's my hierarchy. Within that, your dog's going to eat it. It's going to tolerate it well. Not every dog. Some dogs have weird digestion. They shit weird, and it's not the right food for you. Dog puke after it eats the food, not the right choice for you. But short of that, toxic, not toxic, okay? Micronutrients are where they need to be, and then as much protein, as little carbohydrate as possible.
I think the carbohydrate information is really important because I don't think that people
Not
understand or realize it's not on the label. And now that we know we're going to be seeing this change, and hopefully it's going to change things, because there are so many people who look at labels, that labels are so important to them, that once we start seeing these breakdowns, I think that people are going to, wait a second, I am uncomfortable.
You mentioned earlier, looking at the ingredient list and looking at the first few ingredients and making sure that they are certain things. Pretty good proxy for what the macros are going to be. But the problem is with the imprecise things is they're not bad, but industry figures out how to game them. You probably talk to folks about ingredient splitting, which is this concept in pet food marketing where the brand knows that the consumer is going to look at the ingredient list and go, what are the first 3 ingredients? So they take, instead of just chicken on the label, they're going to break it out into any individual part of chicken that their supplier
But they
gets.
don't have to list the percentage
You
currently.
don't have to list the percentage, exactly. Those things have been around long enough, and they've been reasonably good guides for people to make what are truly healthy decisions. But they've also been around long enough that the producers can game them. And so they're not perfect, and you're going to, at this day and age, you're going to fall victim to them. I put on presentations for our shareholders, investors a lot. I have a slide that I show them. The highest protein, lowest carb, every kind of packaged food under the sun, from ice cream, cereal, protein mix, chips, energy bars, everything. Water. There's literally a water. You go to the pet food store, you'll see lots of stuff about source of ingredients. You see lots of stuff about wholesome, natural, holistic. You're going to see people looking at ingredient labels, but you don't see this many grams of protein, this many grams of carbohydrate. And that's weird. It's weird. It's different than how nutritional science looks at things. It's different how consumers behave in the nutrition world. And so it'll change. It'll change.
It makes me hopeful that the education piece is then going to come in and more people are going to change and we're going to X out some of the issues that we're currently having.
Well, yeah, but just to make sure I leave you on a down note, in case you feel too optimistic, dogs, alas, live super short lives. That's the thing that I always talk about, is like, I'm rock solid, certain about the direction that all these changes are taking. That accumulates, makes it harder for vets to deny stuff. The arc of justice bends. There's a quote that's something like that, but we're moving in the right direction. And I believe that. But unfortunately, you're talking about generational type change for it to be a big deal. I've alluded to smoking a lot during this talk, right? And the history of smoking in the United States, once upon a time, everybody used to smoke, right? Nobody realized it was bad.
With their kids in cars.
Dude, there were national ad campaigns with a guy in a white lab coat that said, "More doctors smoke Camels." That was an ad that was successful enough to be a national ad campaign for Camels. People didn't realize it was bad. And it was a good product in some ways because it made people addicted to it and they wanted to buy more of it. In 1959, after a lot of scientific work was conducted, the Surgeon General of the United States, the highest scientific figure in the country, came out and said, cigarettes cause lung cancer. Watch out, people. If you do this thing, you're going to get lung cancer. Huge, deadly disease. By that point, the science was so unequivocal that you had the Surgeon General of the United States saying that. Rates of smoking in the United States did not begin to drop until 2 decades had passed. Now, that's an addictive product. And so it is the case that there's a lag. But these things take time. If you take carbs out of Nestle Purina's business model, the company fails, period.
Yeah.
Pills, done. It is an existential threat. So those are companies with more money than all the rest of us combined. It's not easy to beat them at that, something that's an existential threat. But unfortunately, some dogs won't live to see it. But you can make the right decision for your dog today if you believe
Exactly.
it. Get scientifically literate, listen to shows like yours, and you'll make better decisions.
A perfect place to end this is you can start today. You can make better choices going for your dog forward from here. And ask questions about nutrition. If you have questions about nutrition, there are so many people out there that I can give you connections to, including Daniel here, so that you can talk to them about nutrition, so that you can understand this whole topic a little bit better. So, Daniel, what would you like to leave the listeners with?
Oh, I've given this some thought.
Okay.
And I give it 3 bullets.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to break your format. So the first is, the primary nutritional issue to keep in mind is protein to carbohydrate ratio. You want as much protein as low carbohydrate as possible. If you're buying a dog food over the counter at a store, a packaged food, you can feel reasonably confident that the micronutrient stuff is all in line well enough that you don't have to worry about it. So the first quality, that if you're interested in optimizing nutrition, most protein, least carbohydrate. That's the first thing. Second thing, this is going to strike people as being an exaggeration, hyperbolic. I honestly don't believe that it is remotely so. And I'm carrying out, as we speak, a survey designed to prove that point up. The biggest stuff that matters for your dog, nutrition-related health, your vet is not going to get it right. They're going to get it wrong. So far, we're more than 100 veterinarian and veterinary technician responses deep on this big survey we've been carried out that has simple, factual statements about the scientific record and has a agree or disagree answer possibilities. So it'll say something like, obesity is more than 50% of the dogs in the country, yes or no, that type of question. And I will tell you that the stuff that matters, 3/4 are getting wrong. You're getting straight up bad information. I believe that to be the case. And yeah, it might sound like conspiracy theory to people, and that's okay. But I feel at least I need to say that. I feel as a science guy and as an evidence guy, it's the case. It's true. And then the third thing I'll leave people with is the best thing you can do to get better at making decisions for your dog is to become scientifically literate. Be able to hear a claim from a guy on a show like yours and go, I'm going to figure out if he's telling me the truth or not. Because you have the resources. If you know the concepts and the tools, they exist now. We live in the internet age. It's incredible. You can find the scientific record for yourself. You can look at it. You can analyze it. Not everybody has the skill set to do it. Developing that skill set has a tremendous amount of value for you and your dog. And your dog, unfortunately, can't do it on its own. Even the smartest border collie in the world will never be able to learn how to analyze the scientific claims for it. But you can. So learn how to be scientifically literate, at least somewhat. Don't trust me. Don't trust your next guest. Definitely don't trust your vet. Figure out how to run the answers down for yourself and understand that if you are lazy about that process, you're going to get the wrong answer. It doesn't mean you're just going to Google it. You have to get the skill set on your own. Otherwise, you're going to make bad decisions because you're going to be subject to being misled. But
I always tell everybody, do your research. Do your research. That's why we talk to so many different people. That's why we talk about so many different topics. Well, Daniel, I know that we have many other things to talk about, so we're going to have to invite you to come back to the podcast.
Yes, I love it.
And I am so excited to chat with you today. It was really wonderful having you here. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah,
and we will see you guys next week on Straight Up Dog Talk. Straight Up Dog Talk was created by Emily Breslin. It is edited and produced under the supervision of Straight Up Dog Talk, LLC and Emily Breslin. If you're enjoying this podcast, follow or subscribe and be sure you don't miss an episode. And leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Looking for more honest and relatable dog content? Check out our sister show, Unpacked, with Jerry Sheriff and Madison Simpson. Thanks for listening to Straight Up Dog Talk. See you next week.